This is the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson. Join me as we visit with growers, agronomists, seed experts, and other industry professionals about seed, agronomy, and the business of farming. Hello, and welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. Today, we welcome back to the Seedcast Stine Technical Agronomist Bill Kessinger. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Thanks for having me, David.
Today's conversation will be part one of a two-part series we'll have with Bill, talking about setting your crop up for early success during the planting season. So in this episode, Bill's going to share his recommendations on the planting season, including the importance of seed selection, planting strategies, and what to do when the weather doesn't cooperate, and market conditions that can influence crop planting and your input decisions for the year. So let's get started. Well, so Bill, as I said, you've been on the podcast before. We were talking about it's been a while, so maybe just kind of give us a quick recap where you're from and kind of your path with Stine.
Thanks, David. Yeah, it's been a couple years since I've been on the Seedcast here. A little bit of my background: I'm from Central Indiana, born and raised there on a farm. Went to Purdue University, got a degree in agronomy. I had an opportunity to come work for Stine Seed Company. This will be my 19th year. So we've had an opportunity to be here for a couple of years. I started in the agronomy department. Then I went to the sales department and worked as an RSA for 8 or 9 years. And then I had the opportunity about 3 years to come back to the agronomy side of things. And basically I do the technical agronomy work now for the majority east of the Mississippi for us. I have 2 field agronomists that help me out in that large area, Ian and Jacob. They do a great job. They're great to work with. And I got a slew of good RSAs that allow me to take care of that wide of an area. But the good part about that, I get to see a lot and have a lot of different experiences every single growing season.
Yeah, when you talk about raising corn east of the Mississippi, there's a wide swath of area there and a lot of different operations and a lot of different ways and timing and a lot that goes on. So you got your hands full there. So today wanted to bring you in and talk about planting. And I know we've done episodes on planning for the planting season, but as this episode airs, we're talking about, we're probably most of our trade area is going to be in the heat of the battle, right, into planting season. So today I kind of want to talk in some length about what to do when after the starter's gun goes off, right? So after we've gotten going, but before we do that, a quick step back and talk about a little bit about what has been influencing the decisions that have gone into this cropping year. We've talked about markets being where they are, and there's been a lot of talk lately about corn acres versus soybean acres. So I guess from where you stand and the folks that you've been talking to, how have the market conditions influenced planning decisions for the growers that you've been working with for the coming season?
Commodity prices always play a factor in what's going on. Stine being a national brand, we work with a lot of different growers that are out there, so there's a lot of different opportunities. I would say this year with the fluctuation that we've had in the commodity prices, or the drop that we've had in the commodity prices, as you get towards some of the south and some of the eastern part that I work with, there's a few more options. We have cotton, we have canola, we have peanuts, we have rice. So in some of those areas, we have seen a little bit of switch maybe out of some soybeans into some of those other types of crops. But when you get back up in the Midwest, yeah, farmers see it, they feel it, but they're really sticking pretty hard to those rotations, that corn-soybean rotation. They're staying with their plan. They're not getting too far out of it. There are a few more corn acres we are probably picking up, but for the most part, I believe growers are staying with the rotation they've been on.
Yeah, it certainly seems like over the years I've witnessed that there can be a lot of talk about acre shifts, and then in the end that there just seems to be an inertia that exists around that corn-soybean rotation. They like that, and it works well. So, like you said, kind of seeing probably a little bit of an acre shift, but not big swings there. So as we think about the inputs and the things that go into the planting season, seed selection, and overall planning, are you noticing any new trends or things that maybe are taking particular importance this year more so than in past years?
Some of the trends that I've noticed is a slight change in maybe some of the trait platforms some of the guys are using, especially in corn. We're seeing a few more just straight glyphosate products, and the demand for those are going up. And part of that is just growers are looking for that ROI. So they're trying to minimize risk, but yet at the same time maximize their returns. They're trying to find some high yielding hybrids out there that maybe don't have all the bells and whistles as far as some of the insect traits that are out there. So we're seeing a little bit more of a draw to maybe a straight glyphosate only product. We are seeing a few conventional guys that are going back to a conventional corn type of a product. And that's something that we sometimes see when we see the commodity prices dip. But it's a little more, it's a little different this time around because we know we have to have yield when you have low commodity prices. The best way to counteract that is to have a high yield so we have more grain to sell. And unlike in the past, maybe, I think we have some really high yielding products as a conventional and the straight glyphosate that can compete with some of the Smart Stacks, the VT2s, some of the Vipteras. So you're watching farmers pull back into that just a little bit. On the soybean side, you're watching growers really stay with the E3 soybeans, that Enlist platform. In the past, when you see commodity prices, you've seen growers go back to maybe a conventional bean trying to pick up a premium, and we're really not seeing that as much this time around. And I think a big part of that is with weed control. The Enlist platform gives you so many weed control options that the conventional program doesn't offer you. So you're going to have to do things a lot different to try to control some of these hard to control weeds, and growers are really cognitive of that. So they're holding that E3 platform and they know the yield potential of it. So like I say, I think we're seeing some traits getting pulled out of the corn, but on the soybeans, growers are just staying really, really staunch with that E3 and they're not chasing that premium this time around.
So continuing to talk about, kind of pre-planting, in the run up to planting season, I guess, in your experience, are there situations where you could point to say one or more of the common mistakes that growers might make when they're kind of gearing up and getting ready for the planting season? They haven't hit the ground yet, but are there things that you really want to caution them to pay close attention to?
The biggest mistake I see growers doing is they spend months planning out this great plan of what they want to do, how they want to plan it. And as soon as the season starts getting here, they start making emotional decisions of, should I do this? Should I do that? And then they just go and do that. They don't stick to that plan that they've spent so long trying to do that's going to make their business better. And they run and they make an emotional decision quickly. So I'd say that's my biggest mistake I see growers do is not sticking to that plan. You've worked hard on it. Don't make that emotional decision right now of planting maybe when I shouldn't just to have it done, or switching hybrids or going to a different field and not staying to that hybrid plan, because that's going to create more mistakes later on down the road that we can't fix at that time. So if it's my biggest thing to growers right now is stay with the plan. You've done a good job researching it. You got everything in place. Just stay calm and make business decisions. Don't make emotional decisions.
Yeah, that's a great point, because hopefully you've made those seed selection choices based on good reasoning and deciding this is the right fit for this acre. And so the last thing you want to do now is kind of throw it all out the window and kind of go a different direction. So one of the big things that always comes into play at planting time often is the weather. Of course, it's the biggest thing that impacts us that we don't control. So how do you advise growers to plan for, the sometimes inevitable factor that weather is going to play, especially as it relates to delays in planting, for example?
The weather's always unpredictable.
Yep.
So trying to figure out a plan is hard. I would say most farmers are optimistic, and they're very positive thinking of this is going to work. So I encourage growers to try to figure that out, is put your plan together and stick with that plan. And as the weather changes, your plan B shouldn't be already figured out. What your plan B is to understand how to ask the questions and how to decide to make an educated decision on plan B. And what I mean with that is, say we have a delay for whatever reason that we have in planting, whether it be rain or maybe it's too dry in some of these areas that we work in. think about what we're trying to do when we make that decision. So it's maybe starting to get towards the end of May or into that growing season that you're going to have, or that planting season that you're going to have. Let's think about the crop that we're going to plant. Instead of just saying, hey, I need a different hybrid, I need something to change, we've selected those hybrids because they're the highest yielding for whatever environment and issues you already have. So we don't want to jump away from that yield potential. So what we want to start thinking about is, okay, what do we need to change? How are these plants growing? So let's take corn, for instance. Corn, we know, grows on growing degree days. So what's a growing degree day? Basically, that is your average temperature that day minus 50. And the minimum is 50 degrees, the maximum is 86 degrees that we use. So when you start figuring that in, I'll take central Indiana where I'm from, for instance. In May, we average about 10.8 growing degree days a day for that crop. And in June, we average 19.6. So we're picking up days much faster in June than we are in May. So yes, we're falling behind, but maybe not at the speed that most growers think we are. So when you start thinking about that, put everybody in perspective, a 100-day hybrid runs you around 2,450 growing degree units to maturity. And a 110-day product is around 2,800. So we're losing days, but we're not losing them that fast. So I want to stick with that corn hybrid that we already have. We've chosen it for a reason for that farm. So before I want to jump to something much earlier, I want to keep that hybrid, but I just want to think about it because I'm going to gain a little bit of moisture into the fall, but not a lot. Because remember, I'm not losing a ton of growing degree days because I'm only averaging 10.8 a day. So something to think about, we know it's going to grow faster in June. We increase populations to increase yield, but as you start getting into that June or that really later time factor, we need to bring that population back slightly. Maybe take about 2,000 population off of that because our plants are going to grow very rapidly. So we know that with that rapid growth, we're going to get a little more height, we're going to get a little more elongation in the bottom of those stalks. So we want to pull that back ever so slightly to maintain that integrity. So we're still keeping the plants that we want on that acre. Now, soybeans are going to work a little bit different when we're thinking about that. As we get into the delay on that planting, we know that soybeans, they mature because they're daylight sensitive.
Right.
So when you're thinking about that, as that gets delayed, corn, you wanted to kind of maybe back that up because you're worried about the moisture. Soybeans, we want to make sure we're keeping that maturity on the fuller end to the middle part of the end, because think about that. The first part of the year when you plant that plant is vegetative growth. And then it switches to reproductive growth at that summer solstice, so around June 21st, give or take. You're going to start seeing flowers on that plant, irregardless of when you're going to plant it.
Right.
So if you're thinking about that, you want a little bit longer of that growing season if you're planting later than versus what you would with corn.
Yeah.
So you're going to plant that fuller season maturity or at least a mid-season maturity as you get later. But like in corn, we told you to back that population down slightly. In soybeans, I'm going to tell you to start bumping that population slightly. In corn, we talk about ears per acre. Soybeans, I'm talking about nodes per acre. I need more nodes to put on flowers so I can hang more pods. And if we know we're going to shorten that vegetative growth period, I just need more plants so I can still maintain the number of nodes I'm getting out there to try to keep that yield up. So when we're making those decisions later on, we got to be thinking about why are we doing it and what are we doing. So we're selecting that we're still using those same products that we selected before. We might just be planting them at slightly different populations. If we get an extreme delay and we're bumping insurance deadlines and that, then we can start thinking about maybe we need to move maturities and make some changes. But in most cases, I think we can use a lot of the products we're already using. We just need to alter how we're going to plant them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like we talked about earlier, that's about, you pick that product for a reason. And just because you're delayed a little bit doesn't necessarily mean that product isn't still going to be the best product. It may just require some tweaking of the plan from whatever the original design was. So we talked about the fact that weather can be one of those, that is really unpredictable part of the plan. Are there other things that come into play that growers need to at least be thinking about contingency plans for in the heat of the planting season?
We're always concerned about weather, but I mean, there's a lot of other things that, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it as we continue this podcast. Is we have to make sure that we're taking into consideration for disease pressures, we're taking into consideration for insect pressures, and we're constantly monitoring those fields. So if we get things planted early, we still have time to fix something if there's a catastrophe that happens. If you start getting later, that window of being able to fix something, that catastrophe that happened, it gets much smaller and a lot more difficult, if even possible, to do.
So I guess when you look at the options that growers have for seed, you kind of mentioned some of these things. When you think about maintaining flexibility when it comes to that farm operation, are there things that they should be looking for in their seed decisions that will help them be at least as flexible as they need to be for whatever this planting season is going to bring to them? What should they be looking for from their seed?
On a flexibility standpoint, every farm's going to be a little bit different, but a big part of that is why we recommend multiple products. We have different products that are out there that are a lot more offensive, that have a lot more yield punch, that we're putting on acres that are really, really good, that we're going to take care of as a high yield environment. And then we may have some more flexible type of the products that we can move around and they can go in different types of environments, and then we're going to manage differently. By having maybe a larger portion of that your portfolio into one of those flexible hybrids, it does give you a little more flexibility on what you're going to do. Some of our highest yielding hybrids are very flexible, but we have a few other ones that maybe are not quite as flexible. We want to keep them and do certain things with them, whether making sure we get fungicides on them or making sure that we keep them at the populations we need, or a lot of different options. So some of those might not be quite as flexible. So making sure that we have a good portfolio of seed so we can have a lot of different options depending on what Mother Nature throws at us and our plant timings, that's going to help us a lot there. On the soybean side of things, like I said, keeping with that Enlist platform keeps us very versatile because it allows us to control weeds the way that we need to do it. By being able to have that glyphosate, that glufosinate, that Enlist product as a post product, that gives us that versatility that we need. So maybe we got our upfront residual on really, really early, and then we had a month and a half that it rained. So we lost some of that residual, and now we're coming back into planting. Well, if I didn't have some of those technologies, that's gonna restrict what I have the ability to do. So I want to make sure I'm doing that. And on the soybean side especially, I want to add that seed treatment in there as well. By putting the seed treatment on there, that's going to help us through some of that adversity, because we know if we get something planted and we get a slow growing condition where it gets cold, where it gets wet, we're going to have increased disease pressure. So if we have some seed treatment on there to help it with some of the Pythiums, the Phytophthora, the Fusariums, to get us through that, that's going to help us be much more versatile. So I think a seed treatment is a must in the versatility game, but also in the high yielding game as well.
Good. So, we've talked a lot on the Seedcast and in our organization about the advent of shorter stature corn. And I know, through the years, you've been really instrumental in helping us grow in our development of this idea. And now it's become, almost a mainstream thing in our industry, which is kind of fun to watch. But as it relates to short corn or higher population planting, those growers who are adopting those strategies, how should they be thinking differently as they head into a planting season, maybe compared to their neighbors who are planting, a more, conventional product in its height or population?
I think those growers that are working with some of the shorter stature corn, as a lot of people like to refer to it as, I personally like to refer to it as a more efficient type of a product, and it gives you a lot more flexibility in what you're doing. Because if you think about it, that stature that's not quite as big and robust is going to be much more efficient in the way that it uses water, the way that it uses nutrients, the way that it's capturing light. It's just going to be more of an efficient plant. So by having that plant and the ability to do that, we can now go into some of those other scenarios, maybe a drier scenario, and keep our population at a little bit higher rate. Because we know, we've proven that corn is averaging roughly a third of a pound of grain. That's not changing. That's why the population is driving this yield. And by doing what you're doing with more of a shorter stature corn, it gives you a much larger window to keep that population where you need to do it. even in rougher environments, whether it's a drought or you got a little too much water early, so you got to plant a little bit later. We can still maintain those populations and get done what we need done.
So, and you mentioned earlier about, sometimes as planting gets really delayed, you may want to consider backing off some of the population, maybe on those hybrids that are the more efficient types. Maybe you've got to be a little more cautious about how much you adjust it, but you may still want to pay attention to that, right?
Correct, David. You're going to want to always be cognitive of that population, because a lot of these more efficient hybrids that we have, we're pushing the limits on some of these populations already. On 30-inch rows, we're up at that 38, 40,000 in some of those places, and in some of our 20 and 15-inch row customers, we're up over 40,000. So we already have a pretty high limit to where we're going, but we still want to move that. If we move that back just a little bit, we still have a lot of plants out there versus somebody that's at that 32, 34,000 range. You move that back a little bit, think about that percentage-wise. That's a much larger difference than what we have. So with those guys that are using our type of system and understanding how this corn plant's really working, we are able to change that cornfield a little bit and change that environment and make it maybe a little bit less stress-free because of the plant that we're choosing to use.
So as a grower, when you're in the heat of the battle, planting season is underway. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of things to pay attention to. What do you advise that growers be, really checking and really paying attention to day in and day out as they're planting? Like, what do they need to be looking at as they're in the process of planting this crop?
That's a great question, David. I get that a lot. What I recommend to growers is you are out there and you're going through the battle of spring. We know it's long. We know it can be drawn out. We have to make sure that we're constantly checking that planter and we're getting the things done that we need to do. A big part of it is get out at least twice a day and check. Check for your spacing. I mean, a common measurement that I like to use is when you get out there and dig, if you got seeds that are 6 inches apart, that's roughly 34,800 population. So you can use that as a quick reference of, okay, is my spacing right? So my monitor's telling me, okay, that's correct. Check my depth. Is my depth correct? Am I planting at 2 inches, 2 1/4, 2 1/2? Where do I need to be? Has anything changed on that planter? Is any of that moving? Clean your seed tubes. You got to think about that, and some people do that. I mean, to me, that's a daily thing we need to do is take that seed tube brush and clean it, because we want to make sure that population sensor is being very accurate. Because think about what we're doing. 30,000 population is 13 seeds per second. So as you start getting up at 36, 38,000, we're at 16, 17 seeds per second. It's trying to count. Machine guns don't shoot that fast. So right. Making sure that that's clean and the dust is out of it, so that monitor is telling us everything that it's doing is correct. Another one that I always tell guys, check your closing wheels. As you bounce across that field, occasionally that spring will get knocked off and you're going to lose that closing wheel, that pressure that you had on there. It happens every year, and we see rows out there that don't come up quite right. Take a look at that. In the morning, check your fertilizer. If you're putting fertilizer on there, did you hit a rock? Did something bend? If you bend that colder on the front just a little bit, you were putting it 2 by 2 where you wanted it. Well, now it's 1 1/2 by 1 because you bent it just a little bit. So then all of a sudden we start having fertilizer issues on that seed. So to me, it's a big deal that a couple times a day, just hop out of the cab, take a quick walkthrough of that planter, and make sure everything is doing what it needs to do, because correcting something then is relatively easy versus trying to come back and correct where we had a couple rows going wrong or we had some depth going wrong that we could have fixed.
Well, and you brought up an interesting point there too, I think, which is, that none of this happens in a vacuum, right? So planting is kind of equipment by environment. So at the same time, what you're looking at and how you're checking might vary depending on if you're having a wet spring, or the alternative is even in a particularly dry spring, dust can be as big of an issue sometimes as mud in certain instances. So paying attention to the things you need to pay attention to at that time and just making sure that everything is running as it should is going to be the key to hopefully getting good emergence and a good early stand, which we're going to talk about in our next episode. So that's good advice. Speaking of advice, I guess as you think about that and we think about this planting season that we're in, what's the best piece of advice that you can give to farmers about staying adaptable and staying responsive to what they need to make sure they get this crop in the best way possible?
I'll reiterate myself again for that answer is stay the course. You have a great plan. You've worked on it. You've worked with your seed rep. You've worked with your ISR, your RSA, your agronomist. You've put this together. Don't panic and make emotional decisions just because the weather did something. Think it through. Call your seed guy. Call your chemical guy and have a quick conversation with them. See what they think just to make sure that we're making the right decisions. I mean, like I said, I enjoy talking to farmers. I enjoy that conversation. So a quick 5-minute phone call might avoid an issue that we're having, or just give you another idea or something to bounce your thoughts off of. So don't be afraid to reach out, bounce your ideas off of somebody for 5 minutes, then make that decision. So that's my biggest advice that I have to growers is don't just run and go do something. Really think about it and make a business decision. And if you do that, I think most guys will be very successful.
So just kind of plan the work and then work the plan.
Yes, sir.
So where would you advise that growers go to look for additional information to help them as they're thinking about or as they're trying to fine-tune their planting strategy? Are there resources you advise them to check out?
The Stine website is a really good resource you can use. There's a lot of information there about the products, about some different things, but it also has contact information to the agronomy staff. It has contact information to the RSAs, and don't hesitate to give all those guys and gals a call. They want to help you through this process, and whether it be a seed-related issue, a chemical-related issue, a fertilizer-related issue, they may not have the answer to all that because, like I said, we here at Stine specialize in seed, but we will do the best we can to help find you that information, whether it's going to the universities or what we need to do to help get you the information you need. So the best thing I can recommend is reach out to your Stine person, whether it's an agronomist or an RSA, and ask them that question and see what we can come up with to help you give you the best answer.
Awesome. Good advice. Well, Bill, thanks for joining us on the podcast today and sharing your thoughts during what is always kind of the mad dash as we get into planting season and helping growers kind of keep their eye on the prize, which is, again, taking advantage of all that great planning that they did through the winter and hopefully translating that into a successful planting season and hopefully in the end a successful harvest season. So appreciate your insights and everything you do for Stine and for our customers. And again, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Thank you for listening to the Stine Seedcast. To never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. Have a question for our experts? Email asktheseedcast@stineseed.com to have your questions answered on a future episode. To learn more about Stine Seed Company, visit stineseed.com. And remember, Stine has yield.